Welcome to Narcissist Apocalypse, everyone. I am Brandon Chadwick, and this is a follow-up episode to the survivor story we had with Cristina. And in this episode, we will be discussing key themes and the fear, obligation, guilt, and shame of Cristina's story. But first, if anyone wants to be on our Survivor Story episodes, go to our website at narcissistapocalypse.com, click on the guest form, fill out the form, press the submit button, and we'll go from there. Also, we have a support group at our website at narcissistapocalypse.com, and we have Zoom meetings every Wednesday night, Thursday afternoons, and Saturday nights. And we have forum boards for you to post on to get the validation you need from survivors just like you. And that is all at narcissistapocalypse.com. And for Cristina's story, for anyone who did not hear Cristina's story, we'll do a little brief overview right now. Cristina grew up pretty quickly. You know, her father died when she was young. She was a little bit parentified by her mom, and she became someone who wanted stability in her life. And she did well in school, and she got a good job after school. She gained stability, and that was a big thing for her. And in her first relationships, you know, she took a little blame for what was going on in it. She stayed a little past the expiration dates as she just didn't know how to break up. And then eventually when she met her ex, it moved quickly. He was very worldly and he felt stable. And they got along easily early on and in some specific aspects throughout this relationship as well, as they had the same taste. He also brought in this kind of false intimacy with his father dying to move things really quickly. As I mentioned, Cristina's dad also passed away young, and this gave this relationship a lot of weight and urgency right from the start. And then the first cracks start showing up in this relationship when her mother visited. Everyone was having a good time, and then out of nowhere, he became cold, threw dry cleaning against the wall, and accused Cristina of lying because her mother wasn't leaving on the day that he expected her to leave. So this was a really big moment here. He put this all on Cristina, calling her a liar, and she was able to explain it away. She tried to make sense of it. She told herself there had to be a reason, and this became a pattern. Maybe he's under a lot of pressure here with what's happened with his dad and him being sick. And from here, the relationship keeps on getting more narrow. He criticized her for being a workaholic, blamed her for his lack of jobs. He became consumed by grievances about his mom and his sister. And the abuser here expects Cristina to regulate him. And she kept on thinking that there would be some reciprocity later, but that never actually came. And then came a move of many moves, and he agrees and encourages this move. He even proposes right before it. Once they arrive at the new location, the story changes here. You know, now the move was her fault. His unemployment was her fault. His disappointment was her fault. And now in this new location, she's working, and he's just getting angrier. He's blaming her for more things. He's intimidating her. He's punching walls. He's threatening to leave. He's making her beg. And then when he does return after these things, after these incidences, she's made to think that she is the one that has to work on herself. And he says that. And then when she becomes a mom, when Cristina becomes a mom in this story, the abuse just continues. And when she gave birth, he was pretty cold and controlling. And then with their second child, the second child had serious health issues. He became detached and left her to like be by herself and went on a trip and really didn't think about anything going on with their child while he was away. He was only thinking about himself. And because of that and him not helping, the mom came to help Cristina. And in the process of that, the abuser then turns on her as well and pushes contact with the family to be more into secrecy and nothing kind of going on in the home. And eventually, a lot of the stuff kind of keeps going on, being blamed, and a lot of intimidation is going on. And there were a couple of attempts of divorce. The second one finally stuck. And then in the aftermath, Cristina starts to realize that she actually has more free time as a single mom with two children than when she was with her ex, and her ex in the picture, because that's how much time and space her ex was actually taking up doing nothing but just causing problems. So that's the story summarized in a nutshell right there. So the big key themes and takeaways from Cristina's story, and the first one is stability as the hook. So at the beginning of Cristina's story, she had this feeling in her life that she just wanted to be fully settled. She had already done a pretty good job, a great job of building this really strong life for herself, but she still wanted that final version of stability, and that came with someone sharing a life with her and having kids. And then this man shows up, this abuser shows up, and he seems to fit that image perfectly. He's worldly. He grew up with this expat life type family. He takes her to a beautiful dinner right off the bat. They connect really quickly. And then he brings her into this really deeply personal situation right away by asking her to meet his dying father. So for someone who lost her own father when young and had spent much of her life trying to hold things together, that's a really big combination right there as far as like what stability might look like. This started to look like stability right away. So Cristina is hooked by this image of stability. They quickly get this cottage house. There's a fast move in, the sense that this is really becoming an adult life, and that feeling that she had finally found someone who matched her, everything about everything. He was just modeling stability for her. And once someone gets attached to this idea that this person represents this home, safety, this adulthood and this type of stability, it becomes much harder to accept that the thing that that looked really stable here is actually the thing that is destabilizing your life further and further. So it's a really big hook right here off the bat. Sometimes you get trust building, sometimes you get that big love bombing, and you consider it love bombing. Here, this is stable building. And the next big key takeaway here is hope as a survival strategy. So with Cristina, she keeps hoping the relationship will settle or improve or return to what she thought it was. And she keeps finding ways to explain behavior, absorb disappointment that's going on, move toward the next possible reset. And when he erupts during her mother's visit, Cristina does not let that moment at all define the relationship. She tries to understand what's going on. Maybe he was triggered. Maybe there's grief from the dad stuff that is surfacing here. Maybe this is just temporary. So later, as his bitterness deepens and his instability starts to become bigger and bigger and bigger, Cristina here is holding on to this idea that there'll be reciprocity for all of these things she's helping with. She thinks that it will eventually come later. There's this hope that is going on, maybe in a few months, maybe after we get through this, maybe after the move, maybe after this next phase of our life. So with Cristina, there's this hope inside this relationship that is her survival strategy to keep this thing going. And what's interesting in her story is later on, and it's not even in this context, but Cristina says that she wakes up with hope in the morning. That's just part of who she is. In a healthy relationship, that's superb. When you're single, that's superb. But when you're in a relationship like this with an abuser, this is something that the abuser is going to live off of. Every move, every new house, every new stage of life gets turned into these fresh starts. So hope here keeps her really emotionally invested in the future version of this relationship, even while the present version is eroding her completely as it goes on. And it becomes less about what is happening and more about what Cristina still believes might happen if she just can hold on a little longer. And that's a big key takeaway and an interesting part of Cristina's story. And then the next key takeaway on our list is the blame shifting and the rewritten reality of Cristina's story. So with Cristina, the abuser here keeps taking situations he participated in or agreed to or created and then rewrites them so that Cristina becomes the one who is at fault. The move in her story of many moves is a perfect example. He's excited to go. He quits his job even before she gives her notice. He proposes right before they leave. This person is all in. And then once they arrive and life does not feel the way that they imagined, the story changes here for the abuser. And now this is the life that Cristina dragged him into. Now she is the reason his career is off track. Now she is the one who has trapped him. So this original shared reality gets replaced by a new one where he is the victim of her decisions, even though those decisions were made together. And this matters a lot because blame shifting just does not just change this argument, it changes the survivor's sense of self. So Cristina starts feeling guilty, she starts fawning more, she starts carrying this misery because she thinks that it is her responsibility. And it's just rewriting reality because it keeps Cristina defending herself instead of really evaluating him and all the problems that he's causing out of thin air. And up next, we have control through unpredictability. So a big part of this story is Cristina never knows which version of her abuser she's going to get. So there's the charming version, the witty version, the one who seems loving and sophisticated and full of possibility. And then there's the cold version, the brooding version, the one that can turn any family moment, any happy moment into a moment of dread and can do it in seconds. So there's the dry cleaning moment with the mother when she's visiting. They're about to leave for dinner. Everyone is giddy. And then he storms in, throws something against the wall, and suddenly the entire emotional atmosphere changes. Now everyone is reacting to him. Now Cristina is begging to understand what is wrong. And now everything is about this grievance and not about this good time anymore. So there's this unpredictability that came out of nowhere. And this pattern here just keeps on growing. As Cristina will describe in this episode, that there is dread coming home from work. She describes mornings that used to hold hope, but now begin with scanning. Who's he going to be today? What is he going to say? This is what unpredictability does. And it keeps the other person mentally occupied at all times. And it did here for Cristina. She couldn't relax in any part of her life because everything was unpredictable. And it trained her to stay alert, to shrink herself, anticipate things, explain things, manage things. And so once someone is living like that, control no longer needs to be stated outright at all when it comes to this unpredictability. Your nervous system is already doing the work for them. And now we're going to go through the fear, obligation, guilt, and shame of Cristina's story and the control that was brought through this. So fear in Cristina's story was not only about being scared of her abuser, it was about learning that peace could disappear at any moment and that once it did, she would be the one left managing all of the fallout. And that creates control because it changes how a person moves through the relationship. So instead of Cristina living freely, she starts to just live more carefully. She starts scanning. She becomes smaller. She's anticipating things. She's trying to prevent the next shift of mood and abuse before it happens. So one part of that fear was sudden emotional punishment. Things could be good, warm, joyful, and then he could just turn cold, hostile, take over the whole emotional state of the whole entire house. And that taught Cristina that safety isn't stable. It can be withdrawn without warning. And once that happens enough times, a person really starts monitoring themselves constantly because they're just trying to avoid triggering the next turn, the next mood shift. Another part of this was the intimidation. There's punching walls, throwing things, packing bags. That control here is making her feel smaller and smaller in what she says, smaller in what she challenges, and smaller in how she reacts to things. And then there was also the fear of being left. And Cristina wanted this life. She wanted this stable life. She wanted that partnership and family and a home and a future that felt stable. So when he's threatening to leave and packing bags or acting like this relationship was hanging by a thread because of her failures, this hit her pretty deeply. And the fear here was not just losing him, it was like losing this whole life she had built around him. And that's a huge fear. So eventually she's just trying to stop that collapse from happening. She's just trying to keep it from breaking it apart. She was trying to stabilize the unstable. So this fear here of him leaving, helps keep her in the relationship longer. And then later on, there's the fear of harassment after separation. And I think this is a really important part of her story, as when she does try to move through the first divorce attempt, the conflict didn't calm down. It got worse. And there were awful texts and threats and attacks on her as a mother, custody threats, a lot of stuff like that. And she started to think to herself, is it better off being in the relationship than out of the relationship? Because out of this relationship isn't good. And eventually they do get back together. So this is a really powerful form of control, that harassment after separation, which is a fear and did get realized, can keep someone in a relationship longer. And up next, we have obligation. And obligation in Cristina's story started early. She was a bit parentified when she was younger. She helped emotionally. This was just in her. She became someone who stepped in, took on more, adapted. And that doesn't disappear in adulthood, especially when someone you love is struggling. So when her ex was grieving, estranged from his family, underperforming at work, and dysregulated, Cristina just didn't see her partner behaving badly. She saw someone who was in pain, maybe needed more from her for a while. She kept trying to carry him through these really dark times because obligation told her that staying engaged, loyal, and supportive was what love looked like. Then obligation gets reinforced by all of the life structures around the relationship, the house, the move, the children, the finances. Once you build a life with someone, obligation becomes very concrete, and you are not just emotionally invested at this point, you are logistically invested at this point, and she feels obligated to this relationship. And up next, we have guilt. And for guilt, so instead of staying focused on what he was doing, Cristina kept getting pulled into the question of whether she had caused it or worsened it or failed to prevent it. And that is where the guilt here becomes controlling, because for a survivor, if they spend their energy fixing themselves, explaining themselves for something they didn't even create, that guilt that can become huge here as part of the control. And going back to the move here, the move is a big example, strong example of this. He agreed to it. He quit his job before she even gave notice. He proposed right before they left. And once the new life in the new city didn't give him what he wanted, he rewrote the story and made her responsible for his unemployment and his resentment and now a life he claimed he never wanted. So the guilt in this moment gave him control because it pushed her into over-functioning. It pushed Cristina into fawning more. It pushed her into catering more. So she tried harder to stabilize him emotionally because she felt guilty for this situation, even though these choices were his own. And these things just kept on happening in her relationship, where she's fawning, she's catering more, and she's owning the situation here, where she's now feeling guilty about situations, even though these choices and things are his. And then up next, we have shame. And Cristina's shame seems to have been built in two stages. The first stage came long before this relationship, after her father died. She grew up fast, became emotionally responsible early. And during this time, she talks about not seeing herself as the best person and about feeling like she could be mean sometimes or too emotional. And later in her early relationships, as we've already discussed, she held on too long. She cheated once, felt a lot of guilt, and came away with a sense that maybe she was not a great partner, that something was wrong with her. So she entered this relationship already carrying a little bit of shame when it comes to this in relationships and who she is as a person. And then the second stage here happens inside this relationship, where that little bit of self-doubt gets reinforced and expanded through this course of control. So he keeps blaming her for the life they had built together. He starts making her feel like she trapped him, burdened him, caused his unhappiness. So over time, that kind of blame stops feeling like something outside of you and starts feeling like it might say something true about who you are. And it's getting reinforced here. So right here, she's now feeling shame. She feels like she is the problem, like, but more that I am a bad person. Something is wrong with me. And then she starts to become suspicious and anxious and on edge and full of dread in ways that she never even recognized herself. And that kind of creates another layer of shame, because now she's not just only being mistreated, she's watching herself become someone she doesn't like. So now that starts to get internalized, that, she doesn't like the person she has become. That's an interesting thing. It's not just the shame of I am a bad person. She starts to become a type of person she doesn't like herself. And now there's a layer of shame around that about how she's feeling. So shame here ran really deep, and it kept her in this relationship longer to make the course of control more effective by attaching itself to these older fears and then creating these new ones about how she felt about herself while the relationship was going on. So that is our fear, obligation, guilt, and shame for Cristina's story. And now we're going to give our goals for Cristina going forward. So going forward, one of the biggest goals for Cristina is just separating compassion from responsibility. So she can just understand that someone who has like losses in life or disappointments or emotional wounds, that she doesn't have to carry them, that she doesn't have to explain them all the time, so that she just doesn't have to carry these things going forward. This isn't her responsibility. And another goal for Cristina going forward is we want her to grieve this imagined stability, that the cottage, the partner, that family life, the version of adulthood that she really wanted to arrive. That's a real thing to grieve, this thing that you wanted for a very, very long time. And, it didn't happen. And it was this thing, this idea. And you still need to grieve that idea. And it deserves to be grieved on its own, because it is a big loss. Stability here was the big structure of her whole entire story and her whole entire life. So it is a massive loss and needs to be grieved properly. And a lot of you out there might be thinking that, I might be going through something like this and it's not that big of a deal, but it is a big deal. And then finally, the last thing we want Cristina to work on is reclaiming a home as her place, a place where she doesn't have to scan, a place where she doesn't have to make herself small, and a place where she doesn't have to placate anyone, and just have peace, feel familiar in your home. And that's a big part of her recovery, just staying in calm and getting used to having not another shoe drop, and that you can just live in it and just being calm for the sake of being in calm, and reclaiming your home as a place of calm. So those are our big things this week, our goals for Cristina going forward. And this was a really interesting story this week with Cristina. We focused on stability in a big way that we never had before. I don't think we ever had before. So I'm really happy that Cristina told her story so we could really focus on that for people who are going through the same thing. And then also, when it comes to the story about hope, I just want to kind of point out here that, hope was used against her, and hope wasn't the reason that this story happened, that this abuse happened. Abuse is the reason that this story happened. And I just want to clarify that before we leave today. And, Cristina's story, she was just trying to hold the whole house together and find that stability with someone who really just was the absolute opposite of it, just dressed up to look a certain way, to look stable, but they were not a stable person. And I hope people out there were validated by Cristina's story, were validated by this debrief episode, by this follow-up episode as well, and that it was helpful for you. And if you want to be a guest like Cristina was on our Survivor Story episodes, go to our website at narcissistapocalypse.com, click on our guest form button, fill it out, and press the submit button. We also have a forum board. We also have a support group on our website, and our support group has Zoom meetings every Wednesday night, Thursday afternoons, and Saturday nights, and we have forum boards for you to post on to get the validation you need from survivors just like you. And we have a newsletter at our website. And our new newsletter, you can get a free workbook of every new survivor story every week, besides other things as well that are in our newsletter for you to read. You also get a free new workbook for every new survivor story, and that is also at narcissistapocalypse.com. You can sign up to that newsletter. And that is it for this follow-up episode. So once again, for Cristina and myself, we hope you have a good night.